world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
This movie was stacked casting wise. Like they stuck like way bigger names in roles that were like just beneath them. Like they appear for like 2 seconds. Like Casey Affleck, that whole.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's all you're gonna use Casey Affleck for?
Dude, I need to talk to you about Casey Affleck's character. I find that guy insane.
Oh yeah. Did you learn more about the real person?
Not the real person, but I just like this. I saw it twice. I saw Oppenheimer twice. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Oh no. That's awesome.
So I like was able to digest a lot of things better the second time around. And Casey Affleck,
I bet. Yeah.
Casey Affleck's character is one of the ones who I just forgot about the first time.
Mhm.
Like I remember that he was in it, but I didn't remember like who he was or what he was doing. And it's really interesting, the character. But yeah, Oppenheimer.
Yeah. Do you know that guy? Just like to give you like the real life context for that guy. Like in this time period of American history that the CIA was like doing all this like secret covert shit.
Sure.
Have you heard about like the assassination attempts on Fidel Castro? That the CIA like they basically tried to kill him.
No, I mean I feel like I have like a kind of a vague awareness of that, but I don't know anything about it really.
Yeah, and that's all I knew. I've heard about this vaguely, but there was like a plot to kill him from his cigar. Like that's the most memeable part of this history. Exploding cigar assassination. The Casey Affleck was like the guy that was in charge of the, whatever division of the CIA.
Okay, got it.
So this is a guy that like probably like was behind killing a lot of people.
Well, in his whole scene where they're like explaining who he is, and Matt Damon's basically saying like this dude is like known in Washington for like killing and torturing people.
Yeah.
Like his whole MO is like cruelty and like getting the information that he needs at like by any means necessary. He's like like even in the circles of like upper echelon super covert like government, he's like known as like this like scary guy. And I assume that's all based off of like real information, real guy. And so I don't know, that just makes it even scarier to me.
Yeah.
That there was this psychopath essentially that was in the government, and even people within the government were like, yeah, that dude is like a psychopath.
Like our government is like pretty tame for the most part. Like we're not like a dictatorial government that just like outright tortures and kills. Well, at least we delegate that down to like several layers of abstraction down. But like this is the one guy in the government where like we're just like that guy is allowed to kill and torture.
Yeah.
But it's just that guy.
Right.
That's our guy.
Did you do the Barbenheimer thing?
Not in the same day.
How close were they together?
Not too close, like maybe a week and a half apart. I watched the first one and watched Oppenheimer here in
The first one, like their sequels or something.
yeah, but I watched that here in California near Berkeley, where a lot of it takes place, and then I watched Barbie in Mexico when I was there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never watched a movie in like a foreign country or like a non-English speaking country. Was the movie itself still in English and had subtitles, or what was?
Yeah, that's what it was
Just-
exactly.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's the regular way they do it. Like, I'm actually not sure.
I think it's like if you have like a movie that is specifically marketed for like international audiences, that you as a studio like spend money to have it dubbed by a different studio. But if not, you probably just like pay someone else to just like put subtitles on it. And
Right.
that'll be good enough.
If it's an animated movie, it's a children's movie, I think they'll probably dub. I'm guessing. But for this kind of thing, and I feel like even like if you're just a Mexican living in Mexico, like you don't want to go watch a movie and have all of the main actors' voices be dubbed over,
Right.
Because you're just like you're missing that part of the performance.
Right. Yeah.
As much as I love the Spanish dubbers, like I grew up like with my dad, like him watching like the Spanish channels where they take all the American movies and dub it over. Yeah. It's just like the same crew of voice actors that do everything.
Oh, really?
And as much as I love those guys, like
I didn't realize that was such a small like industry of people, at least within Mexico. Sure. That's super funny. The same guy who does like Arnold Schwarzenegger is like the same person who does like Robin Williams in a different movie.
Yeah. There's like definitely like the main lead actor guy.
Mm-hmm. Just to get our obligatory Dragon Ball Z reference in early. I saw something about Dragon Ball Z recently, and one of the comments was, it was a voiceover thing. It was like footage from like Sean Schemmel, the guy who plays Goku, like in the studio, recording some lines and, like breaking his vocal cords like he usually does.
Mm-hmm.
And all the comments were just like better than the original, like better than the original Japanese. And like, I don't know how Dragon Ball Z fans like fall on the spectrum of like hardcore anime fans, but I feel like that's not normally the case, where they're like, yeah, the American guy who's dubbing this did it better. It's probably just associated with their childhood.
Exactly.
So did you like Barbie? We don't need to talk about Barbie the whole time, but I just want to know like baseline.
I liked it. We'll get into it some more, but I mean I like Barbie more than I liked Oppenheimer.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like Barbie's pretty divisive.
But it's at least like a colorful, enjoyable, super funny movie. I mean, it's like it keeps the laugh rolling throughout, visual humor and whatnot.
Yeah. It's like I found myself like laughing quite a bit during it.
You were laughing at it.
I was laughing at the absurdity of it. I don't think I'll watch it again, like for its comedic value. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I kept comparing it to Elf, which I feel very similarly about with its comedy, where I think if I maybe had seen Elf or Barbie when I was like 18, I'd be like, this is the funniest shit like ever made. And watching it now, I'm just like, I see what's going on and I'm amused by it one time.
That's interesting, because this is not about Elf, but I feel like Elf is like so rewatchable. Will Ferrell.
It's like the same thing as Barbie, just in terms of tone, I would say, and then also just set pieces. Like they go to a different world, like the magic exists, like the rules of the universe are never explained. It doesn't really matter. It's got kind of like an old. Remember that thing from like the 90s and like early 2000s where like magic was just like present, like ever present, and it didn't matter like where it came from.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be explained by like a physicist. So both of them have that, and then both have Will Ferrell in them. They kind of mirror like a lot of Will Ferrell style like comedy. But yeah, you're probably right. Like Elf is a little bit more rewatchable.
I was just talking about Elf recently because I was watching Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Zooey Deschanel's in both.
Yeah, she's a blonde in Elf, which is really bizarre because
that's right. Yeah,
she doesn't even look like herself in that movie. Like she's borderline unrecognizable in Elf versus anything else.
But I digress.
We digress.
We digressed. Barbenheimer. But yeah, no, enjoyed Barbie. Oppenheimer like had me like really like I had a really hard time with Oppenheimer like finishing it, and I think that's because I'm in a very specific demo for that movie where like
Yeah.
I am a scientist. Like I know the science of what they're talking about very intimately, and like it's very exciting for me because all of those people that were in the movie and all those scientists were like very foundational for the field of physics and chemistry. So I can like geek out on that. And I also read the book that the movie's based on,
American Prometheus.
Yeah, so I had all that background. So it's just it's kind of a little bit of, I'm bringing a little bit of that like the movie is not as good as the book energy to this.
Yeah,
for a few reasons.
I found myself thinking about like your perspective a lot, like while watching the movie, like you specifically, because I was like, I bet Raul like knows who some of these people are or understands on a better level like what they're talking about. Probably even has some criticisms of the way that it's portrayed. I also just know that you like are really romantic about academia and like just like the culture of like high level academics,
Sure.
especially ones that like move the world in specific ways. And then even more specifically, you know, it's like at Berkeley. It's like right next door to you. So like I feel like it's I felt like the first act where you're sort of like hanging out in Berkeley with all these people in their like classrooms, and it's like the 40s and everyone's like smoking and looks really cool. I'd thought about you. I'm like, I bet Raul just thinks this looks awesome.
Yeah.
Even if he has some critical things to say about it.
No, that I absolutely do love. Like I love the representation of like the academics of that time. And the guy, so Ernesto Lawrence.
Which one's
the movie?
he?
I forget what his role in the movie is, but he's the guy that founded Lawrence Berkeley National Lab.
Okay.
He's like the founder of the cyclotron, and that's where I worked up until recently. That was my workplace.
There you go.
And they even have a cool scene in the movie where they're like talking about unionizing.
Mm-hmm. That's a big part of the movie overall, is the politics and unions.
Sure. Well, I think the union thing doesn't take up too much time.
But I see I put the union like kind of the same category as like the Red Scare stuff that happens throughout.
Yeah.
Like,
but there's one scene in particular where they're like they want to unionize at the lab, and then Ernesto Lawrence, the founder of the lab, is like super mad.
Okay, I know who you're talking about now. He's kind of like the dreamy scientist out of all of them. He's like tall and broad shoulders.
Yeah, he's like super good looking for some reason.
Yeah.
But so the reason I brought that up is because like last year at the lab and across the whole state and the UC academic system, there was like these big labor strikes as well. And when I participated in those last year, they were like, you know, I was on the picket line, and there were like people, you know, talking to us through the megaphone, and they like told a story about how like the last time there was like union kind of labor stuff going on at the lab was back when it was founded around this time.
Wow.
And they were like, oh, and the founder of the lab who's like against the unions, and we're like, boo.
When was this? Was this like pre Oppenheimer sort of hype, like on the internet?
Yeah.
Okay. Because surely if they had talked about that beforehand, they would have been like, anybody, like through the megaphone, anybody seen the movie Oppenheimer? Remember that guy? That guy sucks. But if it happened well before, it just wasn't in anyone's consciousness that Oppenheimer would be about the same thing.
Right.
It also,
at that time, they had filmed on campus. So like at that time, there had been a story about some pictures circulating of the production crew on campus.
That's cool. I feel like Oppenheimer really like, I mean, it's related to what we were talking about with Barbie and what everyone else who has a podcast has been talking about. Like those two movies, you know, they created this weird like social phenomenon where everyone decided they were going to go to the movies, many of whom were going to see both.
Right.
And the two movies themselves, you know, they're good movies, but they're not like game changers by any means. It's just a phenomenon. Like, I don't really understand like what happened where everyone collectively on the internet was like, we're all gonna go to the movies and watch
Right.
this.
I would
Like-
love to just like have somebody study this and just read a book about how this kind of social contagion happens.
I'm sure someone's already on it. I'm sure someone's like breaking it down right now. Someone already probably decided to make their thesis about that, like
I'm sure.
Barbenheimer.
I'm sure. And yeah, just in general, you know, like my connection to the movie, it's such interesting history too. The level of interesting that movie has in so many ways is just off the charts. Like it connects with historically, it connects with World War II, a very ripe era for movies and nuclear bombs, communism.
Yes. I mean, it was like arguably the most transformative period in human history.
Yeah. So transformative that like making the nuclear bomb was like, you know, first page news for a week.
Right. I feel like many people don't even know who Oppenheimer was. You know, as Christopher Nolan like has pointed out, like in every single press interview that he's done, and explicitly in the movie itself, Oppenheimer is the most important person who has ever lived. You know, which I find that that line to be a little tired at this point. Like, okay, I get it. Like
when Matt Damon gave it in the movie, this is the most important thing that could possibly happen right now.
They use the word important a lot in the movie, and then like Christopher Nolan himself in like interviews uses the word important a lot, to the point of where like I'm like, okay, I get it. He invented the nuclear bomb, and like the world is different because of it. Also, it's not in a lot of ways, you know, it's just we live in a time of like nuclear stalemate, so just functionally it's kind of the same. You know, I'm just like bitching about I feel like Christopher Nolan just says that too much. I feel like he's talking about it too much. And in the movie, yeah, this is the most important fucking thing. I'm interested in what you've thought about the textual references to the science in the movie.
Oh,
Like when they're literally talking about like what's going on with the science behind it all. Since you are learned in this field, like was it accurate? Did it sound like they were like skipping around?
yeah, I was disappointed in the way the science was portrayed. Like too much glossing over, but you got to understand that like I would have loved a movie that was all that.
Right.
Just like in the Los Alamos lab and with them, like hearing them talk about
yeah, you're in a unique situation. Like I know that you're a geek about all that stuff, so you would have loved to had anything more than what the movie was giving to you, but it has to at the end of the day appeal to mainstream audiences.
It's also a lot of the problems I have with the movie are based on the book as well. Like I think the book has a lot of what the movie is related to what the book is about.
Okay. So like the
more
book
than half
has
of the book,
the book has weaknesses as well. What you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like so much of the book is related to like all the shit that happened afterwards and all of the political issues that he had and like the character assassination involving his ties with communism, which I found so uninteresting, mainly because like most of the charges against them were kind of trumped up charges.
They were bullshit.
They were bullshit.
And that's what the third act of the movie is really about, is that the whole trial is kind of like a farce. Right.
And that's a lot of the book, but it's so boring because like all that really happened is that one time somebody approached Oppenheimer and they were like if you have anything like that you would like me to relay to our Russian allies, you know, I have some channels that you can go through. And then Oppenheimer was like, no, I would never do that. That's treason. And that's the end of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I find the whole like Strauss, like the third act narrative where it really starts to focus on the trial and Strauss, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, and how he was feeling, he felt vindictive towards Oppenheimer. And that was basically like the MacGuffin of the whole like last third of the movie. The first time I watched it, I did not understand like why Robert Downey Jr.'s character was upset, what he truly had to do with the trial, and subsequently I wasn't even interested in any of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that like a big chunk of the book is that, because it sounds like Christopher Nolan wanted to be pretty faithful like to the book, and it sounds like that's a pretty big part of the book. But it's so like by comparison so small and like boring compared to like everything leading up to like the Trinity test and the bombs being hauled away. It's like, okay, now let's talk about like Oppenheimer's really kind of like nuanced like political issues like after that were ultimately pretty short-lived.
It's like
why is this why is this 1/3 of the movie
right
about atomic bombs?
The movie like famously, I think, kind of decided to not dwell too much on the Trinity test. Like it wasn't so much of a climax of the movie at that point. Like, like a lot of people have commented about how the explosion doesn't look that big and it's just like not that cool of a scene overall.
That was my first takeaway. Like the very first thing I said after the movie was like the explosion wasn't that great.
Right.
And it's because like all of the media, and it's probably not the fault of Christopher Nolan, but it's like the marketing for the whole thing was like it's all about the explosion. Like you got to go see it in IMAX so you can watch an atomic bomb go off in the most spectacular way. And I honestly wouldn't even recommend anyone see it at IMAX. I don't think that the movie benefits that much from IMAX at all.
Yeah. That scene in particular is certainly not, and really nothing else in the movie would warrant.
It's all dialogue. It's a bunch of guys in rooms, small rooms, talking.
Small rooms. So that like really wasn't the focus. And God, I find it boring, the whole Strauss thing. I mean, I think it sucks what happened to him, but and it's like a very interesting to like learn about how essentially like how he was going against the grain of what was going on at the time. Like he like right off the bat, politically, he's like, even before they detonated the bomb in Japan, Oppenheimer thought that what we should do is to just come out in the open to the Russians and say, we have this weapon, let's collaborate on this so we don't kill each other. What he didn't want to happen is what did happen, where like each side kind of gets dug in and it creates this nuclear arms race.
I do find like the aftermath where he lobbied for, international control of nuclear weapons pretty interesting. Because that's like, that seems like kind of the best option. I mean, I don't know, but as far as I can tell, it seems like a pretty responsible move on his part.
Right.
To at least try to get like the world government involved. Someone in another podcast mentioned something about like maybe something similar will happen with like AI. Like as AI evolves, like they want to like give the United Nations like control over the technology. I'm not really sure how that would work, but someone made that comparison.
It's what we should do, but we clearly have no ability to do that.
Yeah.
To responsibly like govern or control.
The cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag.
The genie's out of the bottle. Okay, so skimming over the science, what'd you think of the imagery, like kind of in the first 20 minutes or so when he's like an apprentice or like a whatever he is? He's like younger and he's learning under some professors and he's learning more about like quantum theory, and he's like lying awake at night and he has these like visions of what I assume are like electrons like zooming
like
around.
All those particle things zooming around.
Yeah, just sort of the abstract like imagery of quantum physics. Like what do you think about how those are represented?
I didn't understand it at all. It didn't do anything for me.
I thought it was pretty interesting.
You like looking at it?
Yeah, I mean I think it's a little cheesy.
It is cheesy. That's what I think.
I think it's a little cheesy where he's literally like an emo kid like in his dorm room bed like looking up at the ceiling and he sees like a vision of an atom like floating around. But I don't know how else I would do it and make it seem kind of. I understand what Christopher Nolan is like trying to do. He's like, this guy is learning something about like the secrets of the universe, for the lack of a better term. Like he's learning about like the way that the world works in a way that like 99% of people don't. Like, and he wants to represent that visually. And I'll say this, right after I watched the movie the first time, I said that the way the movie deals with like scientists as a like group of people, it treats them as sort of as this like removed class of keepers of knowledge, not unlike fucking wizards in like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The scene where Einstein and Oppenheimer are literally just like walking around like in the woods or near a lake, and they're talking about like this unknown technology that will change the world and it will change the fate of things, is like the exact same thing as Gandalf and Saruman like walking through Isengard talking about the world is changing and the enemy has come back. And so Christopher Nolan loves the idea that scientists are these like unknowable like keepers of secret knowledge. And then I listened to an interview with him where he literally talked about Oppenheimer as like an apprentice magician.
Yeah. No, that comes through for sure.
And so like back to the, he's seeing visions of atoms. It is like a little silly, but I understand what he's trying to communicate, where it's just like, look at these guys, look at these like amazing guys like discovering like these secrets, and look how like magical it seems to them.
Sure.
So for that reason, I like it, but I also I don't know how you would do it and not be cheesy. So that's my only takeaway.
I wonder if there's a way to make a compelling scene like around a blackboard with scientists just kind of like going off on theory.
No, there's not. That's
like,
not.
This changes everything.
That's not interesting. Like baseline.
Do you know that scene from A Serious Man where like he's like a quantum chemistry professor or something in that movie, right?
I thought he was just like a math professor or something.
It might have been. I think it was physics.
Okay.
But there's like the scenes of his dream where he's standing in the classroom in front of a just humongous blackboard with scribbles all over it.
It's been a while since I saw A Serious Man, but rings a bell.
But just something like that. But to the point of like them being wizards and whatnot, like that's so warranted considering what they would deliver, and like considering the fact that quantum mechanics, what they call the new physics, which I think is such an interesting phrase that they use, had only existed for like a couple of decades max.
What was really interesting is, and I wasn't really aware of this, but like, at the time, like Einstein was still a guy, still like hanging out in places, but these based on the movie, and I assume the book, he was sort of like old news at that point. He's like old school, like the popular or really important science of the time like had surpassed him in most ways. And so he's like sort of this afterthought to these guys. Like Einstein, the guy who most people associate with, the smartest person who ever lived and like changed the world with just his theories. To these guys, they were like, that guy's like, he was okay, but he's getting kind of old, and I don't think he really gets it anymore.
Yeah. You'll hear that, like I've heard that kind of take before on him. Like he was resistant to quantum mechanics for whatever reason, and I don't know. I guess they just give him a bad reputation. But the movie really did him dirty. They made him so frumpy.
Yeah.
Just this like sweatpants wearing older man.
He seemed like a guy who was like
his hat everywhere,
well into retirement.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that was crystal from the movie.
Yeah, they definitely didn't make him seem like this great mind. It almost seemed like it almost seems like it takes, there are those like silly photos of Einstein with like his like tongue sticking out, and like every time, like every mad scientist in pop culture is based off of Einstein because of like his wild hair, his like wild like white hair. But like I have to assume that his hair did not look like that 90% of the time. That there was just like, there's a few images of Einstein that really stuck and calcified in like pop culture's like perception of him. And it seemed like the movie just kind of leaned into that. It didn't
Yeah.
really spend any time dealing with who that guy might actually have been. It was just like, here's a caricature of Einstein, which
Yeah.
makes him seem even more like kind of this silly wizard character who lives in the woods.
But like to the point of scientists at that time being wizards, like God, they so were.
I would agree. See, I don't feel the same way about like just scientists in general. Like I don't
Today.
today, or just, across disciplines. Like
Sure.
not any scientist for just like the sake of being a scientist is not granted this made up title of wizard that we're talking about right now.
No. It's
But like,
specifically these scientists because they were on to something like particular.
right.
They were on the cusp of something.
Right. They unlocked like a piece of the universe that was like unknown to humans beforehand.
Do you know how long it took them to make the nuclear bomb? Like between Oppenheimer being tapped to lead this project and them exploding the bomb.
Like a year?
Like 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
But that's no time at all.
The movie does a really good job of making the process of building the bomb feel like a literal race. Like it, for whatever reason, like when it gets to like the Trinity part, which is just kind of the second act of the movie, I think, where it's kind of turns into like a heist movie, where it's just like, let's recruit some scientists, and there's like a montage of like Matt Damon and Cillian Murphy like on the train, just like going across the country, like rounding up scientists. It's like straight up like a heist movie. And then like everything that precedes that, it's pretty good with its pacing to be like, these guys are just like, they're literally racing like another country to build this thing, to discover this thing. There's that scene where I forget who the professor is, but like one of the other, I think he's German. Bohr. He like comes back from Germany to Los Alamos and like gives the scientists like a little briefing on like what Heisenberg is up to. And I forget what he says, but the scientists at Los Alamos are basically like, oh, we just did that. We just did whatever Heisenberg is working on right now. And like, that's wrong. Like he took a wrong turn. So that means we're ahead.
They saw the sketch that Bourne brought back to show them, and they're like, oh, this isn't a bomb, this is a reactor. So instead of like being something that like goes boom, they're just like trying to figure out like a nuclear power plant pretty much. And so they're like, oh yeah, we're way ahead of them, we beat them.
Yeah, but I love that because it's like, how much more ahead could you conceivably be, like based on that, like a few months or something? It just seemed like the timescales that they were working within and like how it compared to their competition were so small.
But then they realized that it's not small at all. In fact, they're like well ahead. And then like the country that they're racing against drops out of the war, is defeated. And then they're just left with this like huge bomb.
Yeah.
And a remaining access power. They're like, oh, I guess we should, while we're here, might as well, That
was like the part of the trailer. It's like they won't understand it until they use it. The darkest part of the movie, really.
That scene in the auditorium, like after they complete the project and he's like giving that kind of like speech to his team, is really cool. Where
the crowd is like cheering for him. He's giving like a speech under the basketball hoop, which I thought was really funny. I assume that that's at Los Alamos, like where the speech is happening.
Yeah.
So like all the people there are like Los Alamos residents.
Right.
So scientists or families of scientists.
He wasn't presenting at a high school pep rally.
Right. Like the fact that it's under a basketball hoop, I think, is just really funny or interesting. It's just the seriousness of like what he's talking about, and the fact that he's basically like in a high school gym is weird.
Right.
And, yeah, that scene rocks. Like with all of the different plays with like audio and the visuals of whatever's in his mind, like the room like vibrating around him. There's like a part where people stand up to cheer, but you only hear kind of like the shuffling of them like in the bleachers, not actually them cheering. It's a really like trippy scene.
Yeah. It's a cool audio trick where like you take a very loud moment and you selectively just like let go certain parts of the sound making process
Mm-hmm.
and mute others. Yeah, very interesting.
I have to believe that that's like, I don't know, you ever been in like a super high stress or hyper focused state of mind, and your brain kind of works like that.
Yeah.
Like you sort of are able to filter things out. I used to think, there's that old stereotype of, if like a man is like distracted and his like wife is calling him, he just like can't hear it, or he like tunes it out. I used to think that that was just a silly joke, or like making fun of like how dumb like 80s and 90s sitcoms thought men were, but that's like a real thing. You can totally just like tune out like certain like levels of information, audio or otherwise. Like you can just remove it from your experience. And like
tunnel
when
vision for your ears.
Yeah. And then when you're in like the situation that he's in, where he just doomed humanity, like I imagine that whatever that phenomenon is in full effect.
It must have been really surreal to be him. I can't even imagine.
How did he die?
Cancer.
Yeah.
That's how the book ends. It takes you all the way through him just like basically he died like not good in his life. Like he had been, his security clearance had been removed, his reputation had been tarnished, and then he died of lung cancer or something.
Let me talk about the security clearance thing real quick, because that's like a huge part of like the third act when he's on trial. Because the thing that's on trial is his security clearance.
Right.
And I feel like myself, Grace said this, and I imagine other people don't quite understand like the stakes of that. I think a normal person watches like the trial scene and you're like, oh, okay, like he's on trial for being like a suspected communist, and like the end of that means he's like gonna go to prison, which is bad.
Yeah.
But at the end they're like, we think you're a loyal citizen, but you have been stripped of your security clearance, and the movie makes it very clear that that's like still like a very terrible outcome.
Right.
And I don't quite get why. If I had to guess, it's just like that he's no longer involved in like what is done or worked on with atomic weapons. Is that it?
That's basically it. It's just that like the government, like certain forces within the government were trying really hard to assassinate his character and make it so that he wouldn't have any sway on policy, because he was just, like I said, against the grain on what the government was wanting to do with nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was their attempt to push him out, and it succeeded.
But as an alternative to killing him,
I don't think they would have killed him, but it worked in the end. But not super high stakes. I mean, that's really all it is. It's just like you're watching the process of him being defamed.
I think that the movie does not do a great job of explaining why that's important. I think that the defamation part is clear, but I don't think it does a great job of explaining like why his defamation means anything. Because it's like he already invented the bomb, and then sort of the last like important moment like physically with the bomb is when they're shipping the bomb away, when they put it in crates and it's on trucks, and it's very clear at that point that he doesn't have any control at all anymore. Like that's the moment when he like loses control or sway or influence over the use of atomic weapons, according to the movie. And it doesn't do a good job of explaining like what his security clearance has to do with anything after that. It's like the government already has the bomb, they're using it, like who cares like about your security clearance?
Yeah. No, I feel that criticism for sure. And like that's why I think that's a ding on the movie for just not handling that very well.
What'd you think of the Florence Pugh role in this movie?
Who is that?
Florence Pugh is I forget the historical character she is. She is Oppenheimer's mistress, the psychologist.
Oh yeah. Jean Tatlock.
Tatlock. That's it. But yeah, what'd you think of her? What you think of that whole dynamic?
It's interesting. Did you see the hand that like from the scene that she commits suicide in?
Yeah, I
That
saw
was
it.
fun.
I thought it was the first time I saw it. I saw the hand, and then I was watching for it the second time because I'd also listened to a different podcast where they had mentioned it. Because the first time I watched it, I saw the hand, and definitely registered in my mind as like a different hand from hers. Just that there was another person in the room, but there was so much like stimulus during that scene that I just kind of chalked it up to like my misunderstanding of something. I was like, oh, I saw a hand, but like, I don't know. Clearly, she committed suicide. So I don't know what I saw. And then the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, that's clearly a hand.
Oh yeah, there's a hand there.
And who knows? It's the whole movie is like from Oppenheimer's perspective, so that doesn't mean that she was actually killed. Just sort of like a little playful suggestion that she might have been killed.
Yeah. In real life, that's kind of that's like it seems like she killed herself, but like people speculate that she might have been killed by like Casey Affleck. Affleck might have.
It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy for sure.
It's a fun conspiracy,
and not even like a unreasonable one at all.
Right?
Because at the time, like Oppenheimer was like secretly communicating with her,
right?
Because of the love affair, but to a government, that would just seem like you're communicating with a spy.
Yeah.
This known communist.
And he seemed like, at least in the movie, he seems to understand a level of that because he like blames himself for her death, whether it was suicide or not. Like he seems like smart enough to understand that he's to blame either way. The first time I saw the movie, because he's like, out in the country and he's basically, having a full on meltdown over her death. And he says to Kitty, his wife, that it's like, I did it. It was my fault. Like, I killed her or something, which is his way of saying it's his fault, that he caused it. But for a moment, I was like, did he literally kill her?
He was a third hand.
Yeah. But I quickly dismissed that. But for like a moment, I thought there was some sort of like murder mystery subplot being introduced in the movie.
Yeah. So in real life, when she died, her dad was the first person to like discover the scene. And apparently there was like several hours that elapsed between him finding the body and him calling authorities. And in that time, like he burned a bunch of documents in a fireplace.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Fascinating
stuff.
Have you ever seen the Santa Claus, the Tim Allen movie?
Yeah, I have.
Do you remember Bernard from that movie? The elf, like the sort of teenage elf.
I don't recollect.
Here, I will show you a photo. This guy, not ringing any bells.
Not ringing a bell, but yeah, why do you bring him up?
Because the actor is David Krumholtz, who is this guy in Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Which is literally insane to me. There's, as you mentioned, like there's so many like characters, like historical characters in this movie, all played by like pretty like high level actors. I heard somewhere that the strategy of like casting that many like recognizable actors in roles where they have so few lines, the idea is that like there's so many people like in the story that like you need people that you would recognize from just other things to just be in those roles so you can like keep the story straight, like in your mind.
I like that.
You're like, oh, that's Rami Malek, who has like 4 lines in the whole movie, but like you recognize.
But your brain registers that as like important person. Oh, that character must be an important person.
Right. Even if they're not.
Even if they don't have time to explain to you why they are, or if they're not.
Right. But this guy in particular, he just looks like, if you go watch the Santa Claus sometime and just like jog your memory on who that guy is, and then like think about him in this movie, he just looks and sounds completely different. And I even saw him as like an adult actor in another show called Numbers, like many years after Santa Claus. And him in this movie, he just is like, you can see his face in there, but his voice is like, I mean, he sounds like how he looks in this photo. Just kind of this grumbly, like kind of larger man. And I don't understand like how someone can make that large of like a physical and auditory change. Like it blew my mind when I figured out that was Bernard from the Santa Claus.
That's so funny. Because elves are supposed to be forever. Elves don't change. Did you identify this like the first watch, or did you?
No, I had to learn about it later because I literally didn't recognize him. There's a part in the movie, talking about Florence Pugh again. Remember when he breaks up with her because he gets involved with Emily Blunt's character, Kitty, and they're like talking about it, and she's like crying, and they're both sitting like on the ground next to her bed, and she's like, "You knocked her up." And it's implied, that's the reason that he has to break up with her and the reason that Kitty has to divorce her husband. And she was like, "You knocked her up. Like, that didn't take long." And Oppenheimer's response is, "You can't keep a good man down." Do you remember that?
Not from the movie. No.
It's just a ludicrous line to say to someone like in that kind of moment. And also one that seems kind of out of place in like this movie. Maybe that's exactly what he said, and maybe that's in the book, but it just seemed like crazy out of left field. Be like,
yeah,
you knocked her up, can't keep a good man down. It's like, what is this? Like a Judd Apatow movie for like 3 seconds?
He is like the movie didn't dwell too much on it, but like the book kind of goes into detail about how he was basically like a ladies' man. Like
he's a scoundrel. He's like a hound dog.
A quote from somebody else describing Oppenheimer, I think of like one of his assistants, was like he's really a man of women. Like he loves their attention. He loves like getting their attention.
Yeah. I mean, it dives into that a little bit. I mean, just a scoundrel. That's like the best way I can describe it.
I don't know what that has to do with atomic physics, but okay.
He's a womanizer. Well, I would imagine, I mean, they really like let you know that he's exceedingly like arrogant in the movie, which kind of goes hand in hand with being like a womanizer. I think that when you reach a certain level of pride and arrogance, especially like in his case where like the arrogance, I'm not going to say is like warranted, but it is certainly like, it makes sense. Like he's literally like doing something that most people don't understand and is of equal importance. Like he's like on the edge of some technology that will change the world, and he's like literally one of a handful of people who like understands why and how it works.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that like some arrogance would be bred out of that. Doesn't make it right, but
right.
I get it. And I think being a womanizer just comes hand in hand. If you're like, I'm the literal smartest guy in the world, so like I could probably just like have sex with anyone I want. That scene where he's talking to Kitty for the first time, he's like at some party. She's like, "Can you explain quantum physics or something to me?" Like it all seems very baffling. And he like uses it as a moment to like flirt with her. Mm-hmm. Really hardcore. And he says something about, the laws of attraction between atoms, and as soon as he said that, when I watch it, I'm like, just shut the fuck up, dude. Yeah. Shut the fuck up with like laws of attraction in this movie, flirting with a woman.
Yeah,
I thought that was the dumbest thing.
It doesn't work at all, dude. I can vouch for that. you're fucking spitting quantum mechanics at a bar.
It makes you look dumber. It makes you look lame.
Yeah.
When you're
I remember thinking that.
Yeah. I just thought it was so funny that it's in there as like a serious line. The laws of attraction between atoms is what keeps our hands from going through one another. Get the fuck off the stage, dude.
That's funny. Do you remember do you remember the scene from Breaking Bad? It's like a flashback to the husband and wife, their courtship. And it's like a classroom setting, and it's Bryan Cranston doing the speech about the composition of a human body.
You're confused because he's actually flirting with Gretchen in that scene, not his wife. Yeah, the alternative love interest. But yes, I remember the scene.
He's like 30% oxygen, 30% carbon, and like whatever, like the last 1% is like magic.
Right. Like 0.001%. It's the soul.
Sexually charged magic.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate seeing like scientists like flirt with one another using that kind of language. Sex is sex.
And it doesn't work.
I like how Matt Damon, there's like a scene when he first gets introduced. He like walks into Oppenheimer's classroom and he has his like lieutenant with him, or whoever that is. You know, the other soldier who's with him.
Yeah.
He walks right in, he takes his uniform jacket off, hands it to that lieutenant, and he's just like, have that dry cleaned. And it's like kind of a laugh out loud, like silly joke moment. He's just like, have that dry cleaned. And like Matt Damon, it's not like the last joke that he tells. Like there's several scenes where his dialogue is like written to be funny on purpose.
Yeah.
Like we'll have him killed. I'm just kidding line. And then he has the near zero, like Oppenheimer says, like, oh, we discovered there's a remote possibility that we could ignite the atmosphere. And he's like, how remote? He's like, the chances are near zero. And he's like, near zero.
How?
And that's like a big like call out in like the trailer, because it's like funny. Like in the trailer, it's sort of like played as a joke, just as it is in the movie. It's like funny. They're like actually like funny dialogue scenes in an otherwise like pretty serious and important movie.
That's funny. I was listening to the Blank Check just released an episode on Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I listened to that.
Did you go all the way through it?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm an hour in and they haven't fucking talked about the movie at all.
Yeah, that's just Blank Check though.
That's what they do. But yeah, they remarked the same thing about how like Matt Damon's performance is like funny.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing in the goddamn world. It's like, yeah, it's just a little over the top.
I want you to go watch this interview. I don't know who it is. You probably know who it is. There's this like physicist, Brian Cox.
Oh, okay. Yeah, British guy.
He looks kind of like a beetle to me. Like he looks like a physics beetle. Anyways, the point I was making is there is an interview with him, Brian Cox, and Christopher Nolan. Brian Cox is interviewing Christopher Nolan about Oppenheimer. And it's really interesting to me, even someone who doesn't really understand physics in the way that you do, watching like a real scientist talk to a guy who's like trying to make a movie that's like fascinated by and also loyal to science, but is also probably just as informed as I am, Christopher Nolan, which is to say not much. And I feel like the interview it's mostly like pretty pleasant, but I sensed this weird like tension with it, where Christopher Nolan was like trying his best to not look stupid in front of this guy.
Yeah.
Or like not
I can see the risk of that.
Talk about the movie in a way that like reflects poorly on like how the movie deals with the science. And like Brian Cox, he does like a great job of being perfectly pleasant. They're both British guys. They both like keep it, pretty low key the whole time.
Yeah.
But I want you to go watch it just because I feel like most, like even like reading in the comments, like most people didn't pick up on that tension, and maybe I was projecting a little bit, but it just felt like I think Christopher Nolan is someone who values, trying to be accurate and realistic and loyal to whatever the field is, like in his movies. But on some like level, he's very self-aware and knows that he's not maybe the best equipped to even do that.
Sure.
And I just could like see a little bit of that, where he was like literally having to talk to like a scientist about the movie that he made that's very much about science.
Yeah. I pulled it up here. It's, I don't know, about 20 minutes.
Report back on that when you get a chance.
Sure.
So I have one more question, and we can go into final thoughts. My question is, would you, as a scientist, have liked to have been recruited for Los Alamos and go live there for a few years?
That's such a good question.
I wrote down scientist camp in my notes. because it kind of seems like a camp experience for all involved.
And like, it really was. Like, it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
normal that they built this new laboratory and moved everybody there for this job.
Right.
It's not like scientists were in the habit of just like being recruited and leaving their lives and doing this kind of thing. It really was like such a unique effort.
Yeah.
To just even make that thing happen.
It sounds as cool as it sounds disruptive. I mean, in the movie, people quit because of that very thing.
Yeah.
But, in the same way where you get kind of excited when it's time to ship off to college or, go be at summer camp for like a week, I would imagine that it might elicit something similar, but maybe even greater because you're working on like this project that's super important.
Right.
So would you do it?
Yeah, absolutely I would. I'm trying to come up for reasons for why I wouldn't, but I'm just like, yes.
It seems like I would imagine if you were who you are now in 1940, whatever, you would obviously know who Oppenheimer was. Like, you would be aware of him as a figure. And so if he showed up like on your campus and was like, hey, do you want to come work on this thing? You would just be like, holy shit, it's Robert Oppenheimer. Yes. Like, yes. I will do whatever you ask me to do.
Right. I wonder how he appealed to the scientists that he recruited. Like, did he lean heavily on like, this is the scientific project of our era, and you would be a fool to not participate just like from a purely intellectual point of view? Mm-hmm. Or did he lean on like, this is a patriotic thing to do? We're in the middle of this great war in Europe.
Given the time period, it seems like either thing could work.
Right.
I feel like the patriotic thing, like if you were to do the same heist experiment now, just like wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. You'd be like, I fucking hate America. No.
Exactly. But yeah, I think I would have. I mean, it was just so. Do you think that they were like morally justified at the time for working on it and whatnot? I mean, there's much that's been talked about on this subject of whether or not, Robert Oppenheimer is a good person or a bad person for doing what he did.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the whole thesis of the movie is just exploring if he's like a good person or a bad person. It's about him more than it's about anything else. More about him than it is the bomb or the war or science. It's him as like a human being.
Right.
And he is
based on his autobiography. So that's
you struggled with that word in a different episode that I listened to recently.
Yeah.
Biography.
Yeah, autobiography.
But yeah, he's like arguably like one of the most morally challenged, ambiguous people in history, because he literally like destroyed the world. That's the line from the movie. I am death. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. I've seen that like line parodied so many times on social media now. It's like I don't know. I can't even come up with one, but people twist it in silly ways.
Uh-huh.
But the movie's about him like dealing with how he basically doomed everyone. And I don't know if there's a straight answer, but I feel like the way he talked about it in the movie, and I assume the book, and have to believe this is how he felt in real life, that it was like a necessary means to an end to prevent the other side from annihilating us. If there were ever like a group of people in the history of the world who you wanted to like beat to creating like an ultimate weapon, it would probably be the Nazis. So in that way, I think it makes sense that he had a way to justify it. He had a way to talk himself through why he was doing it, and subsequently probably had a sales pitch for others on like why it was a necessary thing. But in the end, everybody feels not okay about it. I think notably, Oppenheimer never explicitly stated that he regretted doing what he did. I think that he was very particular and careful in the way that he talked about his work afterwards.
Yeah, he was.
That he never went to say like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. It was always sort of more or less what I just said, that like it was what needed to be done given the circumstances at the time.
Mm-hmm. I watched some real life footage of interviews with him. Like one I watched recently was from like the 60s, just earlier. And yeah, he's very like diplomatic with his answer. The interviewer asked him exactly that. He's like very directly like, how do you feel about like the moral justification of building this weapon of mass destruction? And he gave an answer that was just kind of forgettable.
Yeah. I think
But
I'd
yeah.
probably watch the exact same thing. The YouTube algorithm probably gave us the same interview. Okay, but, so let's talk about what we think of the movie overall, and let's bomb the movie with some scores.
Okay.
We'll drop some atomic weapons on this movie of accolades or lack thereof.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, it's a story that's like very near and dear to my heart. It's like a very important story, and like I think it's cool that
the most important fucking story that's ever been told
of all of our lives. And so I'm like, I'm glad that it was made. I'm glad that I watched it and everything. But I personally found it to be like very slow, and I thought like the editing and the pace of the movie was just grating. It was like uncut gems. It was causing me uncut gems level of stress just from like the aggressive pacing of the scenes and the editing.
It has that like Christopher Nolan sort of like puzzle movie non-linear editing thing going on, but for no real good reason, in my opinion. Like in all his other movies, it serves sort of this like mystery function, and in this movie, it's just kind of there to make the movie seem more artful or interesting or more complicated than it actually is.
It was pretty distracting. Like, I gotta be honest. There was a scene towards the end where I like literally looked over to Stacy and I'm like, this fucking score is so distracting. Like,
I like the music.
There's like a good 20-minute period of the movie where it's just crescendoing towards like some ultimate end.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a bunch of scenes within that period that's just like dialogue scenes where that just has this like really ominous, strong soundtrack on it. And I'm like, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
It was long. It was hard to sit in that theater. But in any case, I'm glad I watched it. And it was a cool, it's always great after you finish reading a book to see the movie, just to see like, how it looks on the screen. So overall, I'm going to give this movie a solid 7 out of 10.
Okay. Very cool. That's
like an average of 2 scores. Like one of the scores is 8 out of 10. The other one's like a 6 out of 10 in like different categories.
Very similar to the score I would give it. Really quick, I don't want an explanation for this. I just want to hear it. First of all, quantify your score.
Yeah. So like 6.5.
It just lowered. Like in the last 30 seconds of this, the score got worse.
Yeah, 5 bombs out of 10, dude. Fucking bombed.
Okay, bombs.
No.
5 bombs. It went from 7 to 6.5 to 5. Cool. I also want to hear just really quick, no explanation, how you would score Barbie.
Such different movies. It's got to be higher because, like, at a certain point, it's just got to like reflect my overall enjoyment.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna give it a 7.5.
Okay. My Barbie score was a 6 out of 10.
Okay. What's
6 out of 10 Mojo Dojo Casas or whatever Ken's thing is.
The Spanish humor in that movie played very nicely in Mexico when they, there were like several. Humor? Yeah. Remember the husband of that like main female character?
He's like using like Rosetta Stone or something to learn Spanish. Yeah,
I'm not really sure why, but that played nicely in Mexico.
Yeah. That makes sense. That is funny. Definitely targeted for like Latino audiences, like wherever they may be. Oppenheimer for me was an enjoyable experience. I did enjoy the music. I agree with you that it is like pretty bombastic for what's essentially a movie of like people just talking for 3 hours, but I liked it. I mean, I think that Christopher Nolan is really trying really hard to like emphasize the ripple effects of what's going on in the movie like throughout history without being able to explicitly sort of talk directly about it, to be like, oh, the outcome of this whole situation literally changed like the trajectory of human history in a way that no other technological achievement has. And he says as much in interviews. Even the script does kind of address it directly at times where, people overuse the word important. But despite all of that, I think that I bought what Christopher Nolan was selling. And I will say I'm not even like a big Christopher Nolan fanboy. Like, I'm not a big fan of Interstellar. I don't think he's as profound of a filmmaker as some people think he is, but he is undeniably a force. Like, he can get stuff done that other people can't, which is the fact that this whole movie is like shot in IMAX and it's just dialogue scenes is like insane. But I think whatever he was selling in this movie, I bought, and I was enjoying it. I enjoyed the music. The explosion was disappointingly small. I think I heard somewhere, did you ever hear this, that there was talk at one point of Christopher Nolan asking like the government to detonate a real atomic bomb to film?
You told me that.
Okay, I told you. So
did you ever look into that?
I didn't ever look into it, but just saying it out loud, it just sounds like hyperbole, and it just sounds silly. But I feel like that was shared among other people. People went into the movie being like, this is going to be the craziest explosion I've ever seen in a movie. And it's so far and away not that. So that was the most disappointing thing right off the bat. Is I wanted to go in to see like a visual spectacle, and what I got was sort of like a deeper dive into history, which I'm there for. Like, that was also fun, but it was not what was marketed to me, nor anyone else who saw the movie, I think. So it loses points for that. I do like Christopher Nolan's obvious obsession with scientists as these otherworldly beings, specifically the ones of the 40s working on nuclear weapons. Could have been shorter. I could have done without the whole Strauss thing. But overall, good time. And I also just give it some extra points because of the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon. Like, it and Barbie played a part in something that I, as someone who loves going to the movies and hates the idea that going to the movies is an activity that is slowly but surely dying. Mm-hmm. I love that two movies were able to like get people back to the movies. I haven't seen a theater as full like during the week, during a matinee, as I did with this movie, like since I worked at a movie theater in like 2009 or 8, which is pretty cool. It made me feel really good, like being at the movies and like everyone having like an actual collective monoculture experience, which is just something that doesn't happen anymore. So I'm going to give Oppenheimer a whopping 8 gadgets out of 10.
Ooh, I like that.
Because gadget was
device.
It was like the PC word that they used to refer to the bomb, because bomb was like too dirty of a word.
The gadget. I like that. All right, well said.
Well said. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Filmhole is produced by just us, myself and Raul. Our music is by W, that's underscore the word double and 2 U's. Get Filmhole wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like it, rate it. If you hate it, maybe don't. Thanks again. See you next time.